What's going on, America? This is Kid Charlie Gaming Nation, here to give my critique of Charlie Kirk. Now, it just sucks that I never knew of this dude. Like, I heard him speak, I've heard him say things, and I did disagree with some of the things he said, but I never paid attention to him. And unfortunately, he's not alive for me to debate him or for me to critique some of the things he says openly in an open platform or forum. I don't agree that he should have died or got assassinated, right? Because he cannot debate back, or men like me who can debate him or defeat his talking points, we cannot change his look and help him to refine his message, or make him look like an idiot, or make him look stupid, or intellectually beat him, right? Because he's dead. He's gone. He's not here, right? So now what he said is left out there, right? But there's no way for him to stand on or fight back or give me a challenge. But I hear a lot of you conservative black men and guys on the right saying we can't critique the dead, while Charlie Kirk was talking about Martin Luther King, who was dead. Now, when you're critiquing the dead, you might not be able to talk about him personally, and I agree to that morally, right? But objectively, we can critique some of the things he said, and some of the policies that he may have helped to pass, and we critique it objectively, so we can learn from the lesson. This shit about you can't critique the dead. What if the dead person did something wrong and it caused a lot of damage? What, we're not supposed to critique him? Like, a lot of the stuff don't make any sense. Right? Yeah, this idea that you can't talk about somebody because they're dead and gone. What if they cause damage that need to be corrected in the living? So we shouldn't be able to critique the small mustache guy by that logic. We shouldn't be able to critique anybody for good or for bad. Mind you, we can talk about the dead in a good light. We can say good things about the dead, but we can't say bad things about the dead. No, y'all talk about Jesus a lot. Y'all could talk about Christ in a negative manner. Especially, but hold on, but this is my critique to the conservatives on the right? You have to critique Malcolm X. You can critique, you could talk about George Floyd. He's dead. You could critique everybody, but we can't critique your hero. No, I don't believe in that. Now, what I do believe in is you're not supposed to critique something about his personal life, something he did personally, like he did at home in his private personal life. Understandable. That should be all. But the things he did in the public space, especially in the context of Charlie Kirk, him doing public speaking engagements, him saying things that were half truth or just untrue, or saying things to I guess speak to his demographic or audience, but using black people as a way to do so, that has to be checked. It has to be corrected. So moving forward, it doesn't happen again. And I have to correct the conservatives, especially the black conservatives that say things that are not true. And we're going to break it down today. Let's go. Let's get into it, right? And I still ain't figured out how to use this. Bad on me. No, this is actually not the one I want to go to. I could go to that. No. It's what I want to go to. Let me use this. So Charlie Kirk, when it comes to the context of Martin Luther King, right? In the past, Kirk had positively described MLK, calling him a hero and a civil rights icon. right? Even posted the sources. Recent shift to criticism. As of December 23rd into early 2024, Kirk tone has turned sharply critical. For example, at America Fest, he said MLK was awful. He's not a good person. He said one good thing he actually didn't believe. He said one good thing he actually didn't believe. So this is quoted what he said. This is from Wired to factcheck.org plus two. So, I'll put the sources here, right, from the transcripts. He condemned the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, calling it a huge mistake. Wired Plus. He claimed the myth has grown around MLK that King is deified, and that despite the positive views now, while he was alive, most people disliked him. Newsweek. We want to figure out why people disliked him, right? When you say people, is this people from the conservative left? Does it mean the conservative right? Right? He also said that judging MLK as a flawless figure is problematic, calling him just a man, a very flawed one at that. Now to the conservative, by that logic, if y'all saying, especially for the black conservatives, shout out to the angry man, you said this. Charlie Kirk spoke on the dead. And he said he was a flawed individual. So that by that logic, now, since Charlie Kirk spoke on the dead, shouldn't we not speak on Charlie Kirk and then go into him personally as a man and see how flawed he was? What a man does publicly, right, for the benefit of people, has nothing to do with what he did privately. If Martin Luther King was a freak behind closed doors, that's his business. The same way, angry man, the same way. Y'all gave leeway to Martin Luther King and everybody else, to P. Diddy, and him being a freak, and how it was wrong for him to go on a trial and go to prison for being a freak. Y'all can let that go for Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was not like P. Diddy in no sense of the matter. Martin Luther King was just a freak, but in the public sphere, in the public light. But guess what? You didn't even know about him being a freak, right? A lot of that was in private record. You didn't know about it until Donald Trump released it. It was rumors and speculations at that point until Donald Trump released the information. But what does that have to do with what Martin Luther King did publicly when he spoke against the Vietnam War, which we all now agree that was wrong for going to the Vietnam War? The fact that Martin Luther King spoke when he evolved, and instead of speaking specifically to black people, he spoke about all people as an American group of people. What is him speaking publicly and what he did for America publicly has to do with his personal private life, Charlie Kirk? Because now it's coming out there about Charlie Kirk's personal life is that he had a person from that community. He was involved with a person from that community as his roommate, as they call it. Right? Interpretation, negative or positive light. Based on his most recent remarks, the light is negative. He's challenging the conventional reference of MLK, criticizing his character, actions, and the legacy of laws like the Civil Rights Act. The tone is one of deconstruction rather than celebration. So, by that logic, we could critique Charlie Kirk, and we could criticize his character and his actions and his legacy of speeches. However, because he had earlier been positive, it indicates a shift. He's gone from someone who honored MLK to someone who views MLK as problematic, especially in how his image is used and perceived today. So we could do the same for Charlie Kirk. He didn't respect the dead. From a speech at America First Feast, December 2023, as reported in Wired, MLK was awful. He's not a good person. He said what good thing he actually didn't believe, right? Kirk also said regarding the Civil Rights Act of 1964 during that same speech, we made a huge mistake when we passed the Civil Rights Act in 1960s. And we're going to go into that. So don't sit your ass. Shout out to Tommy Sotomayor. Sit your black asses down, or your pale ass down, or your yellow ass down, or your whatever ass down, your indigo ass, your green ass, your emerald ass, your hardware ass, whatever your ass, sit your ass down. Additional public comments on MLK Day. Afterward, in January 2024, Cole posted, "A myth has been created and it has grown totally out of control. While he was alive, most people disliked him, yet today he is the most honored, worshipped, even deified person of the 20th century. Newsweek, he was just a man, and a very full one at that." Now, I didn't go into detail about MLK, but I also heard that too, right? And that's the thing a lot with Black culture and everybody else is that, and that's not specific to Black thing, right? A lot of the heroes in any culture, whether it be American culture, when they first arrive, nobody likes them. Everybody's against them. After they've died and the work is done, everybody appreciates what they've done. They honor them as heroes, right? So whether or not Charlie Kirk said that was wrong or right, you know what I'm saying? I'll leave you guys up to be the judge of that. But my argument is that he's critiquing the dead. You feel me? Which is the better one to put up here? This or this? And I had a good one up here, but I don't know what happened to it. Anyway, a myth has so this is what it is. So he's going at a dead person that's not here to defend himself. Audience and strategy. Kirk was speaking at American Fest at Turning Point USA event, designed for his conservative base, not for Black audience. So that means a lot of his conservative base did not like MLK. His rhetoric often plays a culture war trigger. Now, okay, so let me say something about the conservative base. You know how a lot of Black people talk about that there was a switch, right? Well, the switch was actually one-sided. A lot of the Democrats that were Southern Democrats, they switched up and became Republican or conservative. So in my opinion, in my assessment, a lot of the conservatives that you see, not going to say conservatives as a whole, I'm not going to say a lot, but it's a good possibility that there could be a number of conservatives that used to be Southern Democrats and are now have switched up to Republican. So the switch is actually one-sided. Maybe this is why the tone of the conservatives sound kind of racist, because a lot of them switched up. And I think it happened around Lyndon B. Johnson, right? There was something that said that when Lyndon B. Johnson proposed the welfare thing for Black people, there were a lot of Democrats that didn't agree with that, and they switched up to become Republican or conservative. So it's a possibility that a lot of Southern Democrats that were, on the left switched up and became right or conservative, right? And this is why a lot of conservative people, I keep saying a lot. I don't know the ratio or number or not, or percentage or not. But it's possible that on the left could have been, on the right, there could have been racist Democrats that are now conservatives today and have raised their children to feel that way. It's just a different language, right? So let's continue. Okay, this is better. I like this better. That kind of rhetoric doesn't necessarily target only Black people. It positions them as a contrarian against mainstream history and liberal narrative. So I guess, so his rhetoric often plays to cultural war triggers. MLK is widely celebrated across America, so attacking him is a way to signal that Kirk is willing to say what others won't. I get it, you're willing to say things that others won't. But why can't what you say be based on any fact or qualifying information? Right. Now, he's speaking to his base now, right? I guess there's something about his base that don't like MLK, and I guess he was just attacking one of the liberal heroes that the left uses. So that could have been the reason why he was saying something against MLK. But again, he was still speaking on the dead and the conservative audience. You didn't tell him, like you're telling Black people today, and to a lot of you Black conservatives, you didn't tell him what you're telling niggas today. We should not speak on the dead, because he spoke on the dead, and he spoke on the dead to attack the liberal base and to speak to his own benefit, the benefit of his own base. Civil rights acts angle. Much of his attack wasn't just King personality, but on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Conservatives who argue against the law usually frame it as government overreach or anti-liberty. So part of the ideological he's trying to reframe civil rights legislation as a mistake to justify libertarian or hard right position. Now, the classical libertarian, they're about deregulation and individuality, which is core of capitalism, right? Now, Charlie Kirk, he has a right to objectively critique something that Martin Luther King did in the public, like I said earlier. So if he believed that something was wrong with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he has every right to critique that. He has every right to critique Martin Luther King and why he pushed it. But to attack him personally is the issue that I have. And still, he's speaking on the debt. Because now I'm not critiquing Charlie Kirk in his personal life or whatever his flaws were. I'm critiquing what he said in the public forum, which I see a lot of Black people doing on here, but you're saying that they shouldn't be speaking on the debt or whatever. Impact on Black people. Even if his intent was not just poking at Black people, the effect is racialized. Dismissing MLK is awful, goes straight against one of the most unifying Black historical figures. Saying the Civil Rights Act was a mistake undermines the legislation that dismantled Jim Crow, which is what the purpose of Civil Rights Act was. Now, what I disagree with the Civil Rights Act was that no, I'm gonna break it down first. So, regardless of the intent, it lands as a poke at Black people and Black history. Why the shift? Ernie Kirk praised MLK to sound inclusive, mainstream, and safe. Now he's more hostile to align with more open, anti-equalitarian, anti-woke, right-wing audience. That suggests calculated politics, not just random dislike of MLK. Now I understand the anti-woke thing because I don't like anti-woke. Anti-woke hijacked Black men of the conscious community when Black men of the conscious community was more masculine. They were more, they didn't believe it. They under like the Black people. Shout out to Captain Tazariak, right, and Sonetta. The conscious Black men of that time, they understood what white supremacy was, but they understood that they were not going to become the savages that white supremacy was saying that they were. So they worked on trying to clean up their communities, Black power, Black people, love your Black brother, this, that, and the third, especially with the Nation of Islam and whatsoever. So the woke culture hijacked what Black men were doing positively for the community. So that's why I don't like woke, because it promotes something completely different and opposite of what Black men were standing for during the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Objectively, it looks less like Kirk was speaking just to poke Black people, more like he was trying to poke the entire mainstream narrative that reveres MLK and the civil rights movement. But because Black people are central to that history, it inevitably functions as a jab at Black struggle too, which is bullshit because he was also poking at Black people. When he's poking at Black people, and he's talking about the fatherless homes, he's poking at Black men. Ironically, he don't poke at Black women. He specifically pokes things that's attached to Black men. Keep game on that. MLK brought a vision. By the mid-1960s especially, so we're going to go into the civil rights, what it is, right? By the mid-1960s, after the Civil Rights Act, 1964, and Voting Rights Act, 1965, MLK began focusing more on universal issues. Labor rights, Poor People's Campaign, armed to unite poor Black, white, Latino, and Native Americans in fighting economic injustice. So to Charlie Kirk, and to Beyond Your Grave, and to Charlie Kirk's fans, MLK was not just for, over time, him and Malcolm X were at each other because Malcolm X was about separation and segregation, and Black people standing on their own. Martin Luther King was more about integration and more about integrating with white people and coming together as Americans, right? That's why MLK and Malcolm X were diametrically opposed, right? The common denominator was to help Black people, but MLK evolved for something else, right? Not to say that Malcolm X was wrong or anything like that. It's just that Malcolm, relative to Martin Luther King and his self-development, he evolved. And with the labor rights, he was fighting for all poor people, it didn't matter. White people, it didn't matter. So he was for the American people. Anti-war stance. He's 1967. So that says something to a lot of Black people today, because you're against white people, but the leader that y'all revere wasn't against white people, right? Anti-war stance since 1967, beyond Vietnam speech condemned U.S. militarism and imperialism, not just racism. Now, that war in Vietnam, there are plenty of scholars that will argue that we should have never went there. We should have never went to war with Vietnam. Never went there. Out of all the American troops that we lost on our side and the atrocities that happened on the side of the Vietnamese people. So Martin Luther King was right. Maybe not at the moment, but in the long run, he was right. Moral framework, his emphasis on judging people by the content of their character positions his message as American and human-centered, not only Black-centered. What is there to critique about this, Charlie Kirk's base? Because Martin Luther King is actually preaching something to, I think, something similar to what the conservatives are saying. He's appeasing to the American public. He's appeasing to white people too. Rights for white people, right? Why Malcolm X differ? Malcolm X, particularly before his method to privilege, saw America as irredeemable. Racists argued that Black people needed self-determination and separation. And McCall, meanwhile, still have faith that America could live up to its ideals if the Constitution and the Declaration were applied fairly. In short, Malcolm, America is the enemy, build independent Black power, MLK, America has betrayed its promise, hold it accountable to its own creed. So all Martin Luther King was doing was trying to hold America to its own Constitution, its own Declaration, its own stuff. Now, you may disagree with how the left hijacked the civil rights movement and made it become what it is today, but that still doesn't take away from the fact what Martin Luther King's intentions were, right? And Martin Luther King was holding America accountable to its own standards. Why this matters for Charlie Kirk? Kirk's dismissal of MLK as awful ignores the fact that King's vision was deeply American. He used America's own founding documents as the moral measuring stick. By attacking MLK, Kirk isn't just poking at Black history. He's undermining one of the most powerful arguments that America can be improved by living up to its ideals. Charlie Kirk. MLK's later speech were universal. And that's why both his enemies back then and critiques today find him threatening. He wasn't just a Black leader. He was a human rights leader who happened to be Black. So he was a human rights leader. He wasn't just a Black leader. End of the legalized segregation, Jim Crow. Before 1964, Black people faced legally enforced second-class citizenship. Public accommodations, schools, and even jobs could deny them service. Civil Rights Act dismantled that system objectively, a huge step towards equality. So Black people weren't able to find work. So for Black people, this was a big step up. Because a lot of the things preventing Black people from gaining wealth, generational wealth, engaging in capitalism fairly, right? And looking at capitalism as a friend and an enemy, the civil rights helped to get Black people integrated in capitalism because there were a lot of laws preventing them from engaging in it fairly. Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the literacy test, poll taxes, and other discriminatory practices that effectively bar Black people from voting. Now, at this time, remember, Black people were about education. Black people were about being dignified and having integrity. So back then, Black people had a right to say, no, we can vote. We're very literate. You know what I'm saying? Led to an explosion of Black political participation from local schools, boards, to Congress. So you had a lot of Black people participating in the American space, especially when it comes to America. Because now the environment is now less hostile for them to be in. And this could have been a perfect opportunity for the Republicans to now, rectify their mistake with the 1877 compromise. I'm gonna show that in this video. Legal protection. Title 7 outlawed employment discrimination. Title 2 ended segregation in public places. For the first time, the federal government had enforcement powers. Shift in American culture. Put racism and inequality on a national conscience. Force America to live closer to its stated ideals. All men are created equally. That is the most American thing that civil rights movement did. The most American thing, according to all men are created equal, which is something in the Constitution. Disagreements, limitations, and unintended consequences. So now we're going to go into what the argument of it is, right? Reliance on federal government power. Some conservatives argue it gave the federal government authority over private businesses, choices, creating a precedent for government intrusion. Example, forcing private employers, hotels to integrate from a libertarian standpoint to that was overreach. Now, this is where I can understand where the conservatives are coming from, right? Because now the government are forcing businesses to now include or hire people they don't want to hire or include people they don't want to include. Now, I don't mind that, right? And then now you want private people to have to integrate certain stuff, which goes against libertarian, which goes against why the founding fathers came to America and started America. And why the Constitution was created, it was to prevent too much government overreach, right? Which can lead to either communism or Marxism. You know what I'm saying? Now, I'm going to go into the reason why. To the conservatives, or to which were the Southern Democrats' fault, right? The Southern Democrats' fault is the fault for the next thing I'm going to break down. Now, I can understand why the conservatives argue this, right? Because it's taking away their freedom to run their businesses how they want to run it. Understand? And for Black people, there were unintended consequences on their end too, because you had a lot of Black businesses, a lot of Black colleges, a lot of Black towns, a lot of Black cities, a lot of Black hospitals that were gaining government funding because these are all Black spaces. And even though Black money wasn't as big as the white money, it was still big Black money. And Black men were creating stuff for Black people because they couldn't, shop at the white store, shop at the white restaurant, eat at the white place. You understand? Play in the white basketball league, play in the white baseball league. And we see the problems we have now. Because like Angry Man repeats, the white man's ice is always cold. Understand what I'm saying? So I understand what the conservatives are saying because it impacted Black people too. But I'm gonna show what prevented if Black people were left alone in the South, conservatives would not have to dealt with this issue. I'm gonna show you why. The economic impact left incomplete. The laws ended legal barriers, but did not fix economic inequality. Many Black communities remained trapped in poverty, and structural economic issues weren't solved. This is why MLK moved toward economic justice, Poor People's Campaign. Rise of dependency politics. After the CRM victories, other 1960s programs, Great Society, welfare expansion, created dependency structures that hurt Black family formation. Some argue that the civil rights were empowering the social policies that followed, not the act itself, but adjacent, had unintended negative cultural effects. Right? So, what do they mean by that? When you have policies like TANF checks, welfare state, where you're telling Black women not to have a father in the household so you can get this check, that's what it is. Because now, based upon the civil rights, you can create a whole bunch of social policies and implement them. And then now, whatever person from that community over there, or from, the LGBT community, they can pass policies based off the framework or formula of the civil rights. I say it aligns with the civil rights, even though that was not the intention of the civil rights movement, to benefit other people besides Black people. Right? Backlash and political polarization. The CRM successes triggered the Southern strategy and white flight, deepening racial polarization in U.S. politics. Gains for Black people sometimes came with loss in community cohesion due to forced integration battles, right? So now that's now when you're talking about like your Black hospital, your Black businesses, your Black, because they had to integrate white people into their stuff too, right? Which they weren't going to get funding. So if Black people said we don't want white people over here, they weren't going to get funding from the government. You know what I'm saying? So now white people who are deviants can now come into your college and then now do deviant shit. You know what I'm saying? To take revenge or whatever. So now, white people, this is what, if you had not did this to Black people, you had let them grow and become their own monetary force, you wouldn't have to worry. You would never have had to worry about integration because they would have had their own structure and their own independence. But the Tulsa Race Massacre, 1921, a young Black shoeshiner, Dick Rowland, was accused of assaulting a white woman in an elevator. Historians now believe it was either a minor accident or consensual encounter. White mobs stirred panic, spread false stories, and looted and burned Black Wall Street. Newspapers painted Black men as rapists and looters. The destruction caused by white rioters was downplayed, and no white person was ever convicted, though the violence was overwhelmingly white-led. Parallels: Black people accused as the assault aggressor, while white instigators, looters walked free. Right. So this is just one example. The Scottsboro Boys. Right. I'm not going to go through all this, but y'all can read this. Right. All these different things, especially this one. You know what I'm saying? These are the things that, well, especially with Black Wall Street, if towns like Black Wall Street or Tulsa Race Massacre were allowed and they were left alone to grow and become a monetary force in capitalism in America, especially with the intact family structure, and many towns that were Black centered repeated this, you would have never had to worry about integration, and you would never have the Marxism or any white people from the left would never have to weaponize any of this as a way to use Black people to go against America or capitalism or the Republican right. Right? Many of these things are in here that you know what I'm saying could be used. Net effect, benefit, or hindrance. Objectively, for Black people, it was a huge benefit in terms of legal rights, dignity, and political participation. Without it, America might still look like apartheid South Africa. For American culture, it was mostly benefit. It forced the U.S. to face hypocrisy and move closer to its own ideals. And this is during the Cold War. This is during like Stalin. I think this is like Stalin or Russia and Cuba, and they were communist or socialist countries. So it was like, if you go watch the movie Superman the Red Sun, it talks a lot about that, right? For American culture, it was mostly a benefit. It forced the U.S. to face hypocrisy and move closer to its own ideals. But the execution and follow-up, economic justice left unfinished. Welfare expansion mishandled, created cultural side effects that still fuel debate today, right? Bottom line, the civil rights movement was overwhelmingly a net positive, especially for Black people and America's moral standing. But the way government and society followed up on it left unfinished business, especially in economics and family structure, which is where the main criticism left, right? Because now when you have welfare state, when you have WIC and Section 8 encouraging, Black people or Black women to be more dependent upon the government, and then when you couple that with the crash of the industrial economy during the 1970s, leading that up to Bill Clinton's NAFTA agreements taking away jobs from Black men, it creates a whole bunch of mess. You know what I'm saying? And then when you look at the Reaganomics era, Ronald Reagan, with the college thing, right? At one point, the intuition for college wasn't so high. And you know what? Let me go ahead and show it. So it wasn't just on the left. There were mistakes that was made by the right as well. Let me show that right quick. show that right quick. Right quick. There were mistakes being made on the right as well from the Republican, especially from the Reaganomics era. And I think, in my assessment, what Reagan did with the whole college intuition thing, he fucked America's future. In my assessment, I'm gonna break down why once it loads up. Let it load up for a minute. Okay, so let's go here, right? The proletariat definition: the proletariat are members of a society who earn a living by selling their physical or mental capacity to work, their labor power for wages, right? So this is what Reagan's sentiment was, right? Reagan's impact on college affordability as governor of California in 1967 and 1975. Introduction of tuition fees in 1967. Reagan proposed implementing tuition for public higher education in California, a move that was met with significant backlash. Previously, the state had funded higher education, viewing it as a public good beneficial to all. Bestcolleges.com. Budget cuts to higher education. Reagan's administration annually demanded 20% across the board cuts in higher education funding. As president, 1981 to 1989, higher education amendments of the 1986, Reagan signed the Higher Education Amendments of 1986 into law, which extended and amended the Higher Education Act of 1965. This is right around the civil rights movement and all that other stuff. While the bill aimed to support federal assistance to students and educational institutions, it also introduced measures that increased the financial burden on students, such as requiring institutions to match federal funds for the first time. Reagan Library. Tax policies affecting education. Reagan proposed implementing tuition tax credits and modest tax breaks for parents saving for college, aiming to reduce the financial burden on families. However, these measures were limited in scope and did not fully offset the rising cost of tuition. Long-term effects on college affordability. Reagan's policies contributed to a significant increase in college tuition costs. From 1978 to 79, to 2018 to 2019, the average tuition at public colleges increased by 159%, and at private colleges by 174%. AffordableCollegesOnline.com. This rise in tuition has led to a substantial increase in student debt, with 42.8 million Americans holding federal student loan debt as of 2022, New York University. So this was actually something because of Ronald Reagan. Now, this is what's important, and I'm gonna do a separate video on Reagan. Right? This is what's important. Access to Reagan-era policies and a broader shift towards college economy made higher education more expensive and less accessible to lower-income populations. For Black men, this was compounded by historical inequalities in wealth and access, meaning many could not afford college and were effectively shut out of these upward mobility pipelines. Without college, options for professional careers, entrepreneurship, and access to certain industries were severely limited. Now, remember, Black men during this time, during the 70s up until the 90s, they were working more industrial jobs, auto plants, textile companies, manufacturing companies. So they didn't need a degree. All they needed was a high school diploma. So now when you're shifting the bulk of the country towards a college economy, and the bulk of the country was working at textile plants and manufacturing, and the bulk of the country can't afford to go to college now, and you're shifting the economy to a college economy, and you're shifting into more service industry jobs, this causes a problem. Now the majority of people can't afford to go to college. Now you don't have a labor force to now shift to entrepreneurship, or entrepreneurship and service jobs, because now you can't replace the labor force. It's more difficult to replace the labor force. All right, I'll bring it up. Industrial jobs moving overseas. NAFTA, globalization shifted manufacturing jobs and industry jobs overseas. Jobs that Black men could historically access without a college degree disappeared, leaving a structural gap between available skills, labor market demands. This accelerated pressure to pursue higher education, but tuition costs created barriers, creating systematic bottleneck for Black men entering the middle class. Right? So I'm not going to go through all of this now because this is for a separate video, right? So both the left and the right did some things that crippled not only black men, but crippled all of America, right? Especially in economics and family structure, which is where the main criticism live, right? Hiring practices before civil rights. In the South, Jim Crow states, whites only job posting. Many employers openly advertise jobs for white applicants only. What's the problem with that? Majority of the South is white, is black people. A lot of black people are in the South, right? And they're just coming off of slavery. You know, the 1877 compromise, the Republicans stabbed them in the back. Now they don't have any protection or rights in the South because the Republicans left, right? Union exclusion. Trade unions, construction, steel, electrical, etc. often bar black workers, keeping them out of better paying skilled trades. I doubt that affected Irish, Italian, the small hat community. I don't know about Mexicans or the Latin community, right? Sharecropping trap. A large percent of black Southerners were tied to agricultural labor, sharecropping, and tenant farming, which was exploitative, and deliberately kept them in poverty, right? Discrimination in federal jobs. Even government programs, New Deal era, often segregated or gave worse jobs to black applicants, right? In New York, no Jim Crow signs, but same discrimination. Employers in New York can still legally reject an applicant solely for being black. Many companies simply didn't hire black workers for white-collar jobs. Last hired, first fired. Black workers, when hired, were often the first to lose jobs in economic downturns, the Great Depression. Segregated industries. In New York, black workers were clustered in low-wage work, janitors, elevator operators, domestic servants, while being excluded from banks, law firms, and many manufacturing jobs. So now, if you're a black man and you're working a low-wage job, how are you going to support your family and shit? You understand? And with the introduction of the Civil Rights Bill, it helped to relax and prevent all of that stuff. So to conservatives, you might feel away, but look at the hiring practices you were doing, and then you blew up. You're now blowing up or destroying black towns and black cities that were housing black people, or black people were able to find work and not be integrated into your society. Now you bombed them. Now they have no choice but to integrate with you. And like I said earlier, a lot of Southern Democrats switched up to become conservative and Republican. So all of y'all on that side, it is what it is, right? Justice system treatment. Police enforce segregation laws. A black man could be arrested for sitting in the wrong section of the bus. Black defendants almost never had black jurors. Jury exclusion meant all white jurors decided cases against black defendants. The lynching and mob violence were often ignored or tolerated by law enforcement. So now if you're a black person now and you're in the racist South or you're the racist North and you have an all-white jury, they don't look like you, and say you didn't do the crime, they can instantly send you to jail. Just basis off that, right? Not including New York. No formal Jim Crow, but policing was still racially biased. Black neighborhoods were over-policed but black victims often got no justice. Discrimination in sentencing, black defendants received harsher penalties than whites for the same crime. Housing segregation via redlining meant black people lived in heavily policed, under-resourced neighborhoods. Constitutional rights and practice. Although the Constitution technically applied to all citizens after the 14th Amendment, 1868, in practice, black people were denied those rights. Voting rights, poll taxes, literacy tests, understanding clauses, grandfather clauses, and outright intimidation kept most black Southerners from voting. North, black people could technically vote, but voter suppression and intimidation still happen in some areas. And political machines often ignore their voices. Guess what? Now you have to acknowledge their voices because now, because of the Civil Rights and the Voting Act, they can vote now. So now you have to appease to that audience and do something for them to get their vote. So that's the benefit of that. Segregation laws violated the 14th Amendment, but the Supreme Court upheld them in Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate but equal. The Constitution protections like due process were hollow for Black defendants, facing biased judges, prosecutors, and juries. Property and contracts. Many banks refuse loans to Black families. Restrictive covenants and housing deeds barred Black families from buying homes in white neighborhoods, even in New York City. Now remember, Black people at this time, they were not savages. They were highly intelligent, right? Because if that's even a conservative part talking about that. Black people in the past, they were, raising up, they were intact family units. So why were intact family Black units being restricted from buying homes in white neighborhoods? If as y'all claim, Black people were better off that time. Everyday reality. South, a Black college graduate could be refused work in his field because of race and forced into manual labor. Note, a Black man with the same qualification as a white applicant could be told, "We're not hiring your kind," with no legal recourse. Women, Black women were overwhelmingly confined to domestic work, maids, nannies, laundry, and did not office or retail jobs available to white women. So to that Black chick that was talking shit about, I forgot who her name was, talking shit about Martin Luther King and for Charlie Kirk, y'all don't know what the fuck y'all were talking about. That Martin Luther King was a bad person. He was a bad leader, but he sacrificed to give y'all these benefits. Why the Civil Rights Act changed everything? Title VII, 1964 Act made employment discrimination illegal. For the first time, a Black person rejected from a job could sue. EOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, created to enforce anti-discrimination laws. Impact, within years, more Black workers entered professions, unions, and public employment. Objective conclusion. Before civil rights, Black people North and South lived in a society where employment justice and constitutional rights systematically denied or undercut the civil rights movement, forced America to apply its own founding principles to Black citizens, at least legally, through cultural and structural inequalities took much longer to change, right? Difference between critiquing objectively and attacking personally. This is most important, right? Conservative white people, for those of you who are going to tell me a monkey and a machito, well, you're a cave beast that drink pig blood and love goats, right? There should be no reason why me breaking this down intellectually that you can't debate against it intellectually. You shouldn't call me no names, right? So before you respond in my comment section, review what I said and tell me where I'm wrong with what I said and go review the facts because I'm bringing objective facts. I didn't make none of this up. This is things that I pulled from history, historical references. MLK versus Charlie Kirk, the standard. MLK's private life, yes, he had flaws just like any human being, but his public life was where the impact lies. Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Poor People's Campaign, anti-war stance, etc. Those things reshaped American law and culture. That's how impactful his public life was. Charlie Kirk's approach, instead of saying the Civil Rights Act had unintended consequences, an argument that could stand on its own, he went for MLK was awful, which is inflammatory and personal, not analytical. That's not critique, that's character assassination. And it undermines the seriousness of his argument. Right? Speaking on the dead. In American culture, there's an unwritten rule, don't speak ill of the dead. That's why you'll hear respect the dead at funerals, even for people who weren't saints. But history requires honest assessment. We critique President Jefferson, Lincoln, Kennedy, leaders Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, MLK, even world figures, Churchill, Mandela, etc. If we refuse to evaluate people once they're gone, we lose the chance to learn from their mistakes and successes. So yes, it's fair and even necessary to critique the dead, as long as it's honest, balanced, and objective, which is what I'm doing here. The double standard. Kirk attacked MLK, who has been dead for decades. Many conservatives defended Kirk's right to critique. But now that Kirk himself has passed, people flip and say, you can't critique the dead. That's inconsistent. If it's fair to critique MLK, it's fair to critique Charlie Kirk, good or bad. But to you conservatives, the right way versus the wrong way. Wrong way, Kirk's approach. Call MLK awful, ignores his public legacy, and reduce him to his flaws. That's inflammatory. Right way, objective critique. Say MLK was a flawed man, probably, but publicly his leadership was monumental. However, some policies that flowed from the civil rights movement created new challenges, dependency culture, and federal overreach. By doing the second approach, you actually respect history while keeping the critique grounded. How is it that I'm able to come up with that and you intelligent conservatives, you great white people aren't able to come up with that? But the monkey can. Spirit chucker can. Yes, it's absolutely fair to speak on the dead, whether that's MLK, Malcolm X, or Charlie Kirk, but it should be done with honesty and balance. The focus should be on their public impact and legacy, not just private failings or personal attacks. If Charlie Kirk had done that with MLK, he could have made a serious argument, but because he chose the inflammatory route, his critique came off as disrespectful to Black people and historically shallow. And not just the Black people, the white people, the Latin people, even the people on the right, the conservatives, because his policy benefited all people in the labor force, his labor rights, right? You mean to tell me there's not conservative people who are construction workers, who are into the trades, who are into sanitation that didn't benefit from those labor laws that Martin Luther King helped to push in the civil rights? Come on, people. Objective facts of the George Floyd incident. Now, he was able to speak horribly about George Floyd after he died, but none of you conservatives checked or critiqued him. And all of you Black conservative shills, you defended this. And here's where I'm going to break you down to the molecule. Shout out to the angry man. George Floyd was suspected of using a counterfeit 20 bill. He was unarmed, he was restrained, handcuffed, and lying face down. Derek Chauvin, the officer, kept his knee on Floyd's back area for about 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Multiple bystanders, including other officers, observed Floyd saying he could not breathe. Floyd became unresponsive, and the officer still did not release pressure. Police training and the use of force. Objectively, police training allows the officer to use force when a suspect resists arrest or poses a threat. But once a suspect is subdued, restrained, and no longer a threat, continued force is not justified. In fact, most police departments, including Minneapolis at the time, have policies that discourage neck restraints except in life-threatening situations. That is the objective fact. I don't give a fuck what he did in his past. Because you did something in your past, but you're no longer doing that in your past, you've redeemed yourself, and say now a police officer decides to restrain you against, and you weren't doing anything, and he puts his neck on your neck and breaks your neck and you die. It's because now that we dig in your past to find out that you used to, steal candy bars. That gives the police officer the right to put his foot on your neck and kill you? No. Fucking conservative. How many of you conservatives are Christian? Like the Bible says. Ye without sin cast the first stone. I bet a lot of conservatives have sinned. And it would be unfair for a conservative to get fucked up by a police officer unjustly, unfairly, and then justify that because of your past actions. Was Chauvin justified? At the start, using some force to bring Floyd under control could be argued as justified since Floyd was reportedly resisting getting into the police car. After handcuffs and prone position, once he was restrained, face down, and surrounded by officers, he was no longer a threat. Knee for 9 minutes that went far beyond what was necessary. It crossed the line into excessive force and objectively violated use of force standards. So there's a standard for the police, a standard guideline for the police to have, and they violated that. That's the objective facts. What conservatives did wrong in the discourse? Many conservatives highlighted George Floyd's criminal history, robbery, drugs, prison time, but none of that justifies Chauvin's conduct in that moment. Even if Floyd had a bad past, the officer's job was to arrest him lawfully, not punish him in the streets. That's what courts are for. Don't y'all tell Black people not to argue with the police in the streets, take it to the court. So why did the fuck this not apply? See, white people love to say bullshit to black folks, but they don't apply that shit to themselves. When it comes to themselves, it's a different story. Moral logical judgment. Objectively, Chauvin was wrong. That's why he was convicted of murder and manslaughter under U.S. law. Morally, holding your knee on a subdued man's neck until he dies is not law enforcement. It's abuse of power. Logically, Floyd wasn't armed, wasn't attacking, wasn't a lethal threat. The maximum justification was restraint, not lethal force. Bottom line, George Floyd's past life is irrelevant to the objective fact that in that moment he posed no lethal threat. Chauvin's use of force was not justified under police standards, not justified under law, and not justified morally. To the conservatives, if at the time we had nothing good to say, you should have shut the fuck up. And I wish I had a damn computer, and I wish I could have went live at that time, and I could have blasted y'all about that. Y'all could take a pause and then read this. All right. Even though George Floyd had a criminal past, his past crimes were irrelevant at that moment. Justice must be based on present circumstances, not history. The moral question is, was it right to kneel on the neck of a man who was handcuffed, subdued, and crying out for his life? The answer is no. The conservative argument he had criminal history is a moral dodge. The issue isn't whether Floyd was perfect, it's whether the state, through its officer, had the right to act as judge, jury, and executioner. If we allow police to justify excessive force by pointing to a suspect's past, then every citizen with a record could be executed at will. That is not law, that is lawlessness. The principle of justice is that the punishment must fit the crime. The death penalty is not issued for counterfeit money, let alone without trial. We ain't fucking Judge Dredd. Objectively and logically, Derek Chauvin was wrong. Morally, it was an abuse of power. George Floyd's past did not justify his execution on the street. The logic connecting George Floyd and speaking on the dead is rooted in objective assessment versus personal attack. By highlighting his past criminal history, objectively, the key question was, did he pose an immediate threat at the time? Answer, no. Past crimes didn't change that. Kirk attacked MLK's character and alleged personal flaws. Objectively, the key question should have been, did his public life advance civil rights, justice, and equality? Answer, yes. His personal failings don't negate that. Lesson, the moral and logical framework focus on actions that impact society, not private history or allegations unrelated to the event in question. Avoid the character deflection fallacy. This is a common tactic on both sides of political debates. Discredit the person instead of analyzing the event or policy. Floyd, he had a criminal past. So the policy or police were justified. MLK had personal flaws, so his public achievements don't matter. This deflection distracts from the objective evaluation of justice. Proper logic is separate the individual's private history from their public acts. Judge what happened based on context and fact. Critique of dead, fair critique of the dead. Logically, if you accepted that we could critique a living person's public actions, laws, leadership, and conduct, it follows we can critique the dead the same way. The key is balance and objectivity. Critique MLK's public policies and actions, not just alleged private faults. Critique Charlie Kirk, his public statements, strategies, and impact, not just his personality or provocations. This mirrors Floyd. Focus on the objective reality of the event, not personal background or unrelated history. Conservatives, you sound just like the liberals when you want to judge somebody based on their past, right? You sound like, because now you want your public opinion to now subvert the objective reality of the law, right? The liberals do it in a different other way. I just can't think of it at the moment. Per capita argument. I might save this for I might save this for another video. All right. And I have a couple stuff here. Couple stuff here. I think I have some other stuff in here that I'm going to make a video of. All right, cool. So, that's going to be the end of this video. This is Kid Charlie Gaming Nation. Yo, we're going to critique people. Charlie Kirk, he said a lot of things about black people, inflammatory things about black people, right? And they have to be critiqued and corrected, because now the things he said are half truths. You know what I'm saying? So they got to be corrected. Anyway, this is Kid Charlie Gaming Nation. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stuff. Bye-bye.